initiative I'm going to be talking about involves reading aloud that's focusing on the teachers. Joe gave us a really interesting overview of some of the challenges and issues in New Brunswick. And what I'm going to talk about is a micro perspective on an innovation. And it's going to be an innovation that involves in-service teachers as opposed to pre-service. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the collaborators on this larger research project from which this initiative comes are Roy Lister and Susan Ballinger from the University of McGill, from McGill University. And there are a lot of issues that there won't be time to address, but if you're interested in the larger research project, we do have a paper that's coming out in Language Awareness that talks about some of the issues that there won't be time to talk about. So as I said, what I want to talk about today is something that very small scale that we're hoping will become larger scale that involved training with in-service teachers. The context are primary school French immersion teachers, and we worked with pairs of teachers, the French homeroom teacher and the English language arts teacher. And the reason this whole initiative took place was because there's a changed demographic in the school board where these French immersion programs are, where you now, in the English schools that are offering the French immersion, have in some classes equivalent numbers of French dominant and English dominant children. And I'll be happy in the closing plenary to explain a little bit more about how that's come about. But from a language learning perspective, this actually is a potentially very rich context because you have native speakers of both of the target languages and they're also peers. But that's only a potentially rich environment if you have the tools to address it. And the challenges that are faced by these in-service teachers are the following. The teacher training they've had, whether they're French immersion teachers or whether they're the English language arts teachers, in this context tends to have been mother tongue pedagogy. So while in some parts of Canada there's concern about the competence in French of French immersion teachers, here all of the teachers are native speakers of French, but they haven't had second language pedagogy training, at least in the teachers we worked with. Similarly, the English language arts teachers were trained to teach in English schools, so they were trained to teach as mother tongue instructors. They're working in a model of French immersion that emphasizes the separation of the two languages, so that also works against taking advantage of this bilingual nature of their classes. And then the Ministry of Education in Quebec has mandated cross-curricular collaboration, but these in-service teachers have little, if any, training in collaboration, which of course, let alone across languages, which also means, of course, they have little experience. And the other really crucial thing is how much time there is in the school day for any kind of really quality collaboration to take place. So the initiative that I'm going to talk about came about having observed in these classes of mixed English dominant and French dominant children. And a common activity we observed both in the English language arts and in the French immersion homeroom is that teachers read aloud to their students. And we thought, let's put a bilingual twist to this common activity. It's something they're familiar with doing. And so what we came up with in collaboration with the teachers with this idea of having a bilingual reading aloud where the French and English teachers of each class would read from the same storybooks but would vary the language and the chapters that were read. And this took part over 5 months with 3 different books, and we worked with 3 pairs of teachers. And what I'll talk about this afternoon is how important I think it was to start small, because we learned a lot about what would be required to do something like this on a larger scale, which we're hoping to do. So we had a grade 1-2 split, grade 2 and grade 3, and the overall goal was to try to foster cross-curricular and cross-linguistic collaboration. The books come from the Magic Treehouse La Cabane Magique series, and they were written in English, they exist in French, and some of the books in the series also exist in Spanish. What's interesting about these books is that although the actual storyline changes, the theme, the main characters, and the plot are common across the books in the series. What that means, if you imagine yourself as a second language learner in either the French or in the English language arts, is that even though the books are changing, you have a framework that's going to be similar all the way through. So the books are changing and the languages are changing, but you know it's the same theme, the same 2 characters, and somewhat of a common plot. Here's just a view of the 3 books that we used in the series. Now, yesterday we gave a talk where we talked about the impact of this initiative on students, which is clearly important. today what I want to talk about is the teachers, but for those who weren't there yesterday, the reaction of the students was extremely enthusiastic. They were very active participants, and they were quite successful at making some cross-curricular and cross-linguistic connections. But what I want to talk about today is the impact of this initiative on the teachers. They too were enthusiastic, and they were enthusiastic about two parts of the process. They were enthusiastic about the reading aloud with their colleague switching languages. But because we also had debriefings in the forms of stimulated recalls, both after the reading of the first book and after the reading of the third book, it gave them an extremely rare opportunity for in-service teachers, not just to observe their own classes, but also to observe their students in another class and in another language. And that proved to be something that was very valuable to them. And just some evidence of their enthusiasm. At the start of the project, some of the teachers weren't so sure that reading from chapter books was going to work, especially at the lower levels. And the French teacher said that she found the vocabulary rather difficult, but she changed her mind when she saw how involved the students were and how interested they were. And this was at the grade 1-2 level. The grade 2 English teacher similarly said, we were really concerned there weren't enough pictures and how were they going to follow the story, and on top of it we're going from English to French, but they really didn't have a problem with it, they really didn't. And then the grade 3 English teacher commented, those who don't have a big vocabulary in English, I think it helped them come into the story when I was reading the English version because they had a little idea of what was happening. So they, although a little bit skeptical, but certainly willing to go along with it, at the end of the project really saw that there was quite a bit of value in doing it. What we were interested in, as I said at the outset, was collaboration. And there were opportunities for collaboration among teachers who had never collaborated. And every time I read these comments by the students, by the teachers, it really has an effect on me, because I realized what we did in some respects was very basic and not that elaborate. But for the teachers, it was monumental in the sense that they didn't feel alone, as the French teacher said. And then the English teacher said, we're teachers in the same building. We never have a chance to talk to one another. It took you guys to bring us together to discuss and to re-energize us, or just like spark our imagination. And then the grade 2 teaching pair commented that the English teacher said, I really found that fun. And the researcher said, what, to work with each other, to consult with each other? And both teachers said, yes. How did you organize that? And they said, we worked as a team. And have you ever worked as a team before? And they said, no. So they were excited about the level of collaboration. And it was certainly successful at initiating collaboration, talking to each other, something they had never done. One of the teachers, I think as I mentioned yesterday, didn't even know the last name of the colleague that was working with her students in the other language. So this was an opportunity, and that's the place collaboration has to start. They shared ideas, they shared material, and they shared perspectives on students, both those who were doing well and those who were struggling. But it was the innovation was less successful at fostering collaboration on linguistic or content objectives. For example, the teachers often focused on similar vocabulary features. As you can imagine, in the stories, there would be key vocabulary to moving the plot along. But when that happened, as we saw and they saw with us in the videos, it had happened coincidentally. It wasn't something they had planned. They shared material, but they didn't work on it together. So a teacher might have downloaded some material on the internet related to one of the theme and passed some of it on to her colleague, but it wasn't something they worked on together. And both teachers would elaborate the content, but they did so separately. And when they viewed the stimulated recall, this became apparent to some of the teachers. And when we asked them, one of our questions in the stimulated recall at the end, part of the interview, was, what advice would you give to a pair of teachers who would like to embark on a project like this? And they said, find time together. Find time to get together. Actually sit down, and that's one thing we didn't do. So why didn't they collaborate more on language-related objectives? As I said earlier, part of it's training. Their training has not focused on second language, it's focused on first language, so they're not thinking about the second language objectives that one might bring out of a project like this in the way that someone trained in second language pedagogy would. They are also trained to focus on content more than they are on language, at least language from an acquisition point of view. As I also mentioned, it was very rare to have any collaboration across languages. And then time, because although it's mandated by the Ministry of Education, it's not part of the teaching day. And this issue of time was quite salient. The French teacher said, we do projects and we bring things home to work on alone in the evening because there's no time. And often when there's a professional development day, we have professional development at the school board, but it isn't time for us to actually work with our colleagues. And then the grade 3, her counterpart said, I see her working at 4, I see her at 4 and she's still working, I'm not going to disturb her. I know it's not just me and this project that she has to deal with. So to summarize, this was a familiar, easy to implement activity that we think was successful at initiating cross-linguistic collaboration amongst in-service teachers. But more intervention and guidance would be needed for expanding that collaboration. In retrospect, I don't think it was necessary for us to do that, because I think these first steps were really important to just get the teachers used to the notion of even just speaking with each other. But to really go further and have cross-linguistic and cross-curricular collaboration, there's a need for more intervention and guidance from our part. Some of the future intervention areas that we're considering are focusing on key lexical items and word families that would be necessary in both languages, thematic projects that are linked to cross languages, writing projects that are linked to cross languages. For example, one of the French teachers had decided at the end that she was now going to have the students write their own Cabane Magique story, following the same template, the same 2 characters, the idea of books and the theme. It would have been a wonderful opportunity to have done chapter about in the 2 classes, but that would have required more guidance and intervention. And also peer-peer comprehension tasks during reading, so where the peers, while they're being read to, could actually be more involved in helping each other understand. And what we're planning to do, and in fact we have a meeting with the school board next week, is to work with the school board to implement a larger scale in-service teacher training for cross-curricular and cross-linguistic collaboration. And this afternoon in the closing plenary, what I want to talk about is the application of this to other contexts, both within Canada and beyond, and some thoughts that emerged from our experience on in-service teacher training of this nature. Thank you.